Antigua and Barbuda Tourism Beyond Beaches, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Antigua, the larger island comprising the twin island destination of Antigua and Barbuda, is known for its rich history and a multitude of activities to keep you busy. Whether you are looking to relax on the beach or explore the island's culture, there's something for everyone. The rich heritage at Nelson's Dockyard is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a beautifully preserved 18th-century British naval base that has been restored to its former glory. Visitors can explore the old buildings, including the naval officers' quarters, the workshops, and the warehouses. The Antigua Naval Dockyard and its related archaeological sites consist of a group of Georgian naval structures, set within a walled enclosure, on a naturally occurring series of deep narrow bays surrounded by highlands on which defensive fortifications were constructed. The dockyard and its related facilities were built at a time when European nations were battling for supremacy of the seas to obtain control over the lucrative sugar-producing islands of the Eastern Caribbean. Antigua's location as a frontline naval dockyard facility gave the British Navy a strategic advantage over its rivals at a crucial point in history. The construction and operation of the Antigua Naval Dockyard were made possible through the labor and skills of enslaved Africans, whose contribution was crucial for the establishment of the facility and, more widely, for the development of the British Empire, trade, and industrialization. Iturbonus.com. The Antigua Naval Dockyard and its related archaeological sites exhibit an important exchange of human values over some time within the Caribbean and between this region and the rest of the Commonwealth, on developments in architecture, technology, and exploitation of natural topographical features for strategic military purposes. The enslaved Africans toiling in the service of the British Navy and Army built and worked the facilities that were critical to the development of the British Empire, trade, and industrialization. The Georgian period buildings and the archaeological structures and remains stand as testimony to their efforts and continue to influence the architectural, social, and economic development of their descendants. The Antigua Naval Dockyard exceptionally shows how British Admiralty building prototypes were adapted to cope with extremes of climate, and the lessons learnt in the Caribbean in erecting such buildings were subsequently successfully applied in other colonies. Among the most prominent witnesses of this interchange, Clarence House demonstrates how English Georgian architecture was modified to suit the hot tropical climate and to counter the threat of disease, and the emergence of a distinctly colonial Caribbean Georgian architecture, and the officers' quarters and the senior officers' house demonstrate how building forms were adapted, by the addition of features such as storm shutters and verandas, to suit the climate of the Caribbean. Few other sites demonstrate this transition from British prototypes to the use of colonial building forms as clearly as the Antigua Naval Dockyard. The ensemble of the Antigua Naval Dockyard and its related archaeological sites were laid down and built exploiting the natural attributes of the area, the deep waters of English Harbour, the series of hills protecting the bay, the jagged contours of the coastline, and the narrow entrance, in a period when European powers were at war to expand their spheres of influence in the Caribbean. Altogether, the property represents an outstanding example of a Georgian naval facility in the Caribbean context. The Antigua Naval Dockyard and its related archaeological sites demonstrate the process of colonization and the global spread of ideas, building forms and technologies by a leading naval power in the 18th century, as well as the exploitation of favorable geomorphological features for the construction and defense of a strategic compound. Integrity. The inscribed area, 255 hectares, coincides with the former naval dockyard installations and its related former supporting/defensive compounds, which have been in continuous use since 1725. The partially walled dockyard includes an important number of historical buildings, whereas the related former supporting/defensive compounds comprise several structures nowadays reduced to archaeological remains. The property still retains its visual integrity, and the visual relationships and dynamics between the dockyard complex, down at sea level, and the former military structures, in the surrounding hills, are still recognizable. Most of the buildings at the dockyard have either been restored/repaired fairly recently, or are scheduled to undergo restoration in the near future. On the other hand, archaeological structures outside the dockyard exhibit an uneven state of conservation that will benefit from a comprehensive conservation strategy based on the adoption of a minimal intervention approach. Authenticity. The dockyard is located on its original site and continues to be embedded in the same original setting. The buildings within were all originally built between the 18th and 19th centuries and retain their original form and design. Most of them even retain their use and function, and those that do not are used for similar and/or compatible functions. The authenticity of the property in terms of materials, craftsmanship and design will benefit from continuous cooperation amongst conservation architects, architectural historians, and archaeologists in the conception of conservation programs, projects, and works. Archaeological remains are still embedded in a setting that is comparable to the original one. Many of the fortifications and supporting facilities retain their original materials and their visual interrelations. Their form and design have not been altered and can be appreciated through archaeology, historical research, consolidation, stabilization, and interpretation. The informative potential of archaeological vestiges is overall retained. However, protection and maintenance strategies should be set up in order to avoid further loss of historic substance. Protection and management requirements. The Antigua Naval Dockyard and related archaeological sites have been protected as a national park since 1984 under the National Parks Act and managed by the National Parks Authority, NPA. Further means of legal protection are obtained by the recently approved new Environmental Management Bill, 2015, the forthcoming new Heritage Act, the Physical Planning Act, 2003, and the Land Use or Physical Development Plan for Antigua and Barbuda, which defines and establishes zones for appropriate land use. Building guidelines have been designed to orient conservation interventions of historical buildings and archaeological remains and to set standards for new architecture and new guidelines. High standards regarding the dockyard's potential underwater cultural heritage are also needed. The system relies on the National Parks Development and Management Plan, which is specifically prepared under the provisions of subsection 10(2) of the Antigua and Barbuda National Parks Act, 1984. The management plan, with its objectives and its operational instruments, land use zoning plan, action plan, conservation plan, marketing plan, guidelines, etc., forms an integrated management framework that needs to focus on the outstanding universal value of the Antigua Naval Dockyard and related archaeological sites so as to ensure its effective management as a World Heritage property. The Dockyard Museum. The Dockyard Museum was built in 1855 as the officers' quarters and now houses a collection of exhibits on the British colonial site and also on current archaeological research. The Victorian building was restored in the 1970s and served as offices for the national parks before opening its doors as a museum in 1997. It now houses several items belonging to Admiral Lord Nelson, including his famous telescope, as well as an area dedicated to the military history of English Harbour. Fort Berkeley. Fort Berkeley is the oldest fortification in English Harbour, dating to 1704 and was constructed by the colonial government and manned by gunners and matrices hired by the government, not soldiers. As English Harbour became more important with the expansion of the dockyard in the 1740s, more fortifications were constructed to protect the naval installation. This included a dramatic expansion of Fort Berkeley to the size and scope it is today. Today the fortification is accessible along a short nature trail. Visitors often go to the fortification to look back at English Harbour, great vessels as they arrive, and watch Antigua's many world-class sailing regattas. Dow's Hill Interpretation Center. For the best view of the entirety of Nelson's Dockyard National Park, the historic Dow's Hill fortifications are unparalleled. Situated high above English Harbour, the panoramic view takes in the dramatic natural beauty of the park. Plan a short stop with one of our visitor services guides, or host your intimate event. Dow's Hill is the place to be. The site is also home to a museum that tells the story of the dockyard and its importance to the island's history. With stunning views of the harbour and a range of dining and shopping options, Nelson's Dockyard is the perfect place to spend a day exploring the island's rich history and culture. More information about this Antigua and Barbuda National Park on www.nationalparksantigua.com.